Well, this is June the 11th, 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. And for Save Acworth History Foundation, we're doing our first experiment with a remote interview, and didn't have to go too far to find James Albright to interview today, because he's the Director for Parks, Recreation, and I always mess it up, but it's community something.
Resources.
Community resources, okay. So at any rate, I'm going to start out just by asking you a little bit about your background. I think you were maybe about 3 years old by the time you got to Acworth, and started out in Marietta. And so maybe you could just say something about your parents and a little bit about how you got here.
Yeah. So I was born in Kennesaw Hospital. My family lived in some apartments in Marietta for a little while. We had a extremely short stint in Logansport, Indiana. A lot of my father's family come from that area. So we had a very brief, less than a year stint of living up there, and then moved back. My parents settled into the house that they still live in today in the city of Acworth. Around 1986, 1987, I believe. And they've lived there ever since. So that was kind of how we got to where we were. From kind of a growing up standpoint, I tell people one of the things I'm extremely fortunate and blessed to have is to be able to currently work in and impact a community that I was born and raised in. I was educated in. My education started in a preschool at Kennesaw First Baptist Church, and then I started the first grade at Acworth Elementary School, where Butch, who is a current city councilman, was my principal there. And then when I was headed into fourth grade, I ended up, they built Kennesaw Elementary School. So I was able to, so I transferred over to Kennesaw in the fourth grade, finished up fourth and fifth grade there, went to Autry Middle School, and then North Cobb High School, graduated from there in 2000, and then started my studies at Kennesaw State University, where I was able to obtain my bachelor's of sport management. Graduated in 2004 from there, and then went back and got my master's degree in public administration from Kennesaw State in 2008.
Okay, well, you've covered a lot of ground already. What brought your parents back to what brought your parents to Acworth?
So my mom's family is from the New York area, and I'm actually a couple generations removed. My great-grandfather on my mom's side was my great-grandparents had immigrated from Puerto Rico, actually. And they went to the New York area, and then they ended up in the Marietta area. My grandfather on my dad's side moved around a lot. He worked with Interstate Batteries. Exide Batteries, sorry. And his job moved him around a lot, and his job located him here in Marietta, and that's how they ended up here. My parents went to Sprayberry High School.
Mm-hmm. And so they just picked, well, you were up in Indiana and then came back to Acworth.
Yeah.
Was it for work that they came back this way?
No, I just think it was they enjoyed being in Georgia a lot more.
Okay. So what were you, 4 or 5 years old when you came back, or?
Yeah.
Okay. And let's say you must have been born about 1981, maybe?
I was born in December of 1981.
All right. So you've got a big 4-0 coming up next year then.
Hey, not too soon.
Over a year away, I guess. So
yeah.
You're 38 right now then.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So you're still a very young guy.
I like to think so.
Okay. So, well, why don't you talk a little bit about what it was like to grow up in Acworth? I mean, what did you do for recreation? Did you get in trouble all the time, or what was
Yeah,
it like?
I'll leave those stories out, but
Okay.
no. So growing up in the community, Acworth was in a different time then. You know, you kind of, as I was growing up, you know, you started to see the explosion of Barrett Parkway and the mall and a lot of the things that kind of maybe drew younger families down to that particular area. What I remember most about Acworth at that time of growing up is I participated in sporting activities here. I played baseball from the time I was like 5. I started playing football in our youth organization at 7. So our recreation activities were focused there. Something that's important for me that inspired me was my parents' involvement in those organizations.
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in people's actions, and you can learn a lot by their actions. And my family, my parents inspired me. They did a lot of things that I have gotten paid in a career to do. You know, I watched them serve in board meetings. I watched them organize leagues. I saw my dad mowing the grass at the fields when the city didn't do those type of things. I saw my parents clean restrooms at the park. Uh, I remember leaving the house as soon as I got home from school with my dad to go line and drag the ball field because that's what the volunteers did. So all those things contributed to inspiring me there. I also remember visiting Cobble Park, Acworth Beach. I remember it being closed for a period of time, but I distinctly remember that, and then a playground over at Mini Park that my family, we spent a lot of time at. But those were the major reasons that we came to Acworth. And my parents live in the city, but they live right on the fringe of Kennesaw and Acworth, so right kind of in the middle. And there weren't a lot of restaurants to go to then. You know, there was Ernie's Steakhouse, there was the Pizza Hut out on Glade Road, Daddy's Country Kitchen, but there wasn't the selection of restaurants that we have today that my family and I attend. So downtown was almost non-existent at that time. There was not a lot going on. You know, even when I got into the high school age, and you know, my friends and I would go hang out, it wasn't necessarily in downtown Acworth. Like, there's reason to come to downtown Acworth right now, but you know, we did drift to Barrett Parkway and some of the activities going on there. So really, from my experiences in Acworth, it was related to my sporting experiences, the education, and then, you know, the activities at Cobble Park, playing on the playground, things like that.
Talk about the recreation facilities when you were growing up. Where were the ball fields? Are they the same ones that are still there today, or was it a lot fewer, I guess, resources then than today? Where did you go to play ball?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's significantly different, or was significantly different then. So a lot of where I started playing baseball at, and even some of the football experience, was mostly focused out of Coates and Clark Park, which is now Newberry Park today.
Mm-hmm.
There were several fields over there, and that's where we participated in our athletic activities. And then we participated as you kind of started as a young child over in that park, and then you ended up over what we call now the Acworth Sports Complex, where Pop Willis Field, Buddy Crow Jr. Field were. That was kind of from our 9 to 12-year-old sports experience. And then we played our football games and eventually our practices over at Hal Brooks Field, over at what we call now is the Acworth Sports Complex. The facilities were maintained by volunteers at that point, and they worked really hard. A lot of the facilities were constructed by volunteers and fundraising efforts until the city got more involved around 2000, which plays into my story a little bit and how I got started at the city. So won't go too far into that. But the facilities were not in the type of condition they were today. And I don't say that because now I'm ultimately responsible for that. It was just the technology is better and the design of facilities and things have progressed so much more. But even at that point, most of our facilities were aging at that time.
You mentioned some names that fields are named for nowadays. Who was Pop Lewis?
Pop Willis.
Pop Willis.
So, yeah, so I've heard stories as I remember distinctly when we used to do opening day ceremonies, him sitting at a chair when we did an opening day ceremony, and he was definitely later on in life. And the only stories that I heard of him were that he used to buy drinks for kids that hit home runs those particular days. But I always remember that name, Pop Willis. Buddy Crow Jr. was somebody that we named a field for later on. Buddy coached in the program 33 to 34 years, and I actually had the opportunity to play for him. And Buddy was older at that time, but he had coached in the program for a long time. I mentioned Stanley Halbrooks. One of the football fields bears his name. I played for Stanley Halbrooks. He still to this day coaches in the program. He's coached for 45 plus years. And I think that's going back, him, and I think of people like my parents, and then Jim Horgan. Those are people, when I jumped to kind of my football experiences, they built one of the most successful youth sports programs that I've seen or been a part of. But man, they worked their tails off. Those were incredible people that gave a lot of their time, a lot of their resources, their treasure to making these programs happen. And I was just fortunate to be raised in that environment to watch these people, again, do stuff that, we do. And, I've built a career off of getting, paid to do. These people did for free, but it was a different time and a different place.
Sure. What about Newberry Park? Who's that named for?
So that is named for Bobby Van Newberry. Originally it was Coates and Clark Park. There's a story behind it, and I will not do it justice, but he died as a result of an injury on the athletic field, and there's a lot of story to the Newberry family. They're buried at Liberty Hill Cemetery. I know there was a lot of connection to World War II with that family, but that was probably a decision we made 8 to 10 years ago to name that field after him.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a wonderful description of a community that cared about the kids and cared about sports for the kids, and that put in a whole lot of free volunteer time to take care of you all.
Yeah.
Other than sports, what did you do for fun when you were growing up? You said there weren't a whole lot of restaurants around. Where did you go?
So we spent a lot of time in the woods. It was about the time video games started to come on the scene. But I distinctly remember my parents' house was located against Army Corps of Engineer property, and we spent hours and hours in the woods building forts, riding bikes. At that time, we were connected to land that, we could go all the way out to, they're close to 293 or Old Highway 41, and we could go all the way out to Highway 41. And I remember distinctly playing in the woods and riding bikes and hanging out in the wooded areas where NCG Theaters is now, and Target, the Hubert Soccer Complex, all those things. We had a really wide canvas to play on. So we spent a lot of times outdoors, but recreation sports activities did take a lot of time. I ended up playing basketball, football, wrestling, and baseball, and that was something that we spent a lot of time doing.
What about for girls? You were focused on boys, but they have softball teams for girls and such as that when you were growing up?
Yeah, a lot of those activities were conducted by the county over at Kenworth Park. That's one of the things that a lot of people may not understand is, Kenworth Park is a county facility. The sports complex out in front of it along Main Street is a city facility. Mm-hmm. So they always did a lot of the tennis, the softball, those type activities.
Yeah. How was Butch Price as a principal?
He was good. I tried to stay pretty good, so I didn't end up in his office that often.
You spent much time in his office.
Yeah.
But I
No,
wouldn't,
but it
I
is.
wouldn't expect you to.
Yeah, I tried not to, but no, he was a great principal, and he's just one of those characters and those figures you'll always remember. And to kind of see it come full circle when I first started working in the city in 2000 was pretty neat. So to get to know him on a different level, and it's funny because I know him as Butch Price, but
Yeah.
as a principal, it was Albert Price.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or
So
Mr.
at first, I had to figure out who this Butch guy was when I started working here.
Yeah, yeah. Does he still see you as a 6-year-old or?
I hope not,
Okay.
but I don't think he does.
Okay. Well, how were the schools in Acworth? And well, you mentioned Acworth, and then you went to Kennesaw and Autry and North Cobb, and did you feel like you got a really good education here, or any teachers that stood out that were particularly helpful to you along the way?
Yeah, I really enjoyed my experience. It was a difficult transition when you're used to going to Acworth Elementary, and again, my parents lived right in the middle, right? So when they built the new Kennesaw Elementary, I got shifted over there. So that was a different experience there. But what it actually did for me is when I went to Autry, I actually knew more people because pretty much the people from Acworth and the Acworth Elementary and Kennesaw all came together at Autry. So it gave me a little bit of an advantage from a relationship standpoint, as I knew a lot of people when I went there.
Mm-hmm.
And then absolutely loved my experience at North Cobb High School and the memories that we have there. And it was just an incredible school. It was a great representation of the community. I got to build relationships with people of all kinds of different backgrounds and beliefs, and people that had money, people that didn't have money. So it really taught me a lot about life and a lot of the things moving forward. Is it just gave me a great perspective of people in general.
Yeah. You mentioned wrestling. What sports did you play at North Cobb High School?
So I played 4 different sports at different times. I played baseball, basketball, played football, but really I settled in the end in wrestling. That ended up being my passion, probably one of the better sports that I had. Was honored to be, selected as captain of the wrestling team. But that sport did more for me, and I've coached all 4 of those sports as well with my son. But the sport of wrestling did so much for me from individual toughness, from a mindset perspective, just teaching perseverance. Even though you keep score as a team, there's also a lot of individual component to it. There's not a lot of excuses. It's you and one other person on the mat. You don't get to blame the shortstop or the point guard or anybody like that. So definitely taught a lot of accountability. It taught a lot of humility. Some of the matches didn't always go the way that I wanted them to go, but sitting in front of a gym full of people, losing will humble you really quick, but it also encourages you to get better real quick too.
Did you have good attendance at your wrestling matches?
No, wrestling wasn't one of the sports that was overly well attended. Usually those were football and basketball, some of those sporting events.
Yeah. Well, I ran track all the way through school, so I can sympathize with those that didn't have a whole lot of people turning out to watch them.
Yeah.
So, any of the coaches that stood out from North Cobb High School?
Yeah, and some of them I still engage with today. Had the pleasure of getting to know Coach Bob Clark during the process through football. Coach Van Jacobs, he still serves our community. He's retired from North Cobb High School, but I got to know him through the basketball process. And then my wrestling coach was a big inspiration to me, Scott Larson. He really valued hard work. He valued determination. He valued people that were willing to learn and wanted to get better. And he really pushed us to be the best version of what we could be. And so a lot of those there. It was funny, you talk about teachers, and I remember Miss Duggar, Jenny Duggar, was one of those teachers that inspired me, and she was the ones that challenged me. I was fortunate that I was good enough at school to get by and didn't have to apply myself a ton. But I remember her really challenging me, especially in the world of government. So she taught history, local government. I remember her trying to get me involved with Model UN. And as a 17, 18-year-old, I was like, nah, that's not where I'm going to end up. That's not what I want to do. I'm not going to end up in government. So I really believe in leadership. It's people that see more in you than you see in yourself. And I remember that about her. And I remember her challenging me and, making me want to do more in an environment where I felt like I was just kind of coasting. I was way better of a student in college than I was in middle school and high school, but some of that was just application on my end.
Well, living on the border between Acworth and Kennesaw and Autry and North Cobb are kind of between Acworth and Kennesaw also. You didn't have to go very far to go to school, and then when you pick a college, I guess you pick the absolute closest one you could find. Why did you go to Kennesaw?
So I took the SAT one time.
Yeah.
And I got the score I needed to get into Kennesaw. And I really didn't have those ambitions. I didn't have the ambitions to go to UGA or plus some of my lack of application up until that point probably wouldn't have afforded me the ability to get into some of the bigger schools. But I had good enough grades. I just, people look at things differently. A lot of people wanted that experience of going off to college. I didn't. I wanted to stay local. I had the ability to stay at home. Started to work with the city, so I was able to save some money through that process. And my family's everything to me. I'm married to my best friend from high school, and there wasn't that drive in me to want to leave the community. I felt like Kennesaw State had everything that I wanted to. It was really important for me because I was the first college graduate in my family, and that meant the world to me. And my parents were that inspiration. They always told me, and there's a lot of debate out there and discussion now, and I'm a huge supporter of trade schools, and if my child came to me and wanted to, I would fully support trade school. But given the circumstances of my family, I knew it was important for my parents to want to see me to break that chain and to be able to get that college degree. So that was always something that, I wanted to do for them too. And they always said they would pay for my college education. I remember that as a young child, and I just knew how much it meant to them.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take before you decided sport management was what you wanted to major in?
So I entered, this kind of coincides. So I feel like I have to kind of tell both stories here of how I started at the city.
Okay.
And kind of how those stories of education intersect. Mm-hmm. So I graduated from North Cobb High School in 2000. And so that would have been probably June then, I think school kind of went into. I think it was last week in May, first week of June. So I did what everybody does, is you send invitations to your graduation to everybody with no expectation they're actually going to come. You just are kind of looking for that check in the mail, right? If we're all being honest with ourselves. So, yeah, let that secret out. But so I took the money that I got from the graduation presents. I didn't go on some senior trip. I took it and applied it to a 2-week bartending school in Marietta.
A bartending school?
A bartending school. So I figured at that time it was a way to work a couple days a week. I could focus on my studies. And it was 2 weeks and they had guaranteed job placement. So I decided to start bartending school the week after I graduated, and I did a day course. Well, towards the end of that first week, I got a call from one of my old football coaches who had coached at Acworth. They resurrected the Parks and Recreation Department here in like 1998. And he said, "Hey, I hear you want to work with children." And at that time, my ambitions were to go to Kennesaw State, get a history education degree, and to teach high school history and to be a wrestling coach. That's what I wanted to do. So I kind of talked with him a little bit about that. And I said, I don't know that I want to work with young kids. And he's like, look, it's only for 8 weeks. I need some people. At that time, it was $7.25 an hour, which was good money to somebody that didn't have any at that particular time coming out of high school. And there was an end to it, right? Like I could get back to school. I could start bartending once college started in the fall. So I took the opportunity. I was a summer camp counselor during the day and going to bartending school at night. There were some circumstances that happened a few weeks into that. There was a very tragic incident that occurred with our then director. And with that, we as summer camp counselors really had to step up and figure out how to finish the summer. And with that, I kind of started to gain a passion for Parks and Recreation and kind of what that was. And ironically enough, as we were working through some of those challenges, I'd gotten so busy, and the bartending school had a guaranteed job placement. And I kind of forgot about it on an event we were having for summer camp. Tried to call the guy back and explain what had happened. He basically said that if we didn't show up for a gig, that he would never call us back. Fast forward, finish summer camp, start college. And then as I'm about to start college, the administration for the department approached me and said, hey, we need a few people part-time to clean bathrooms, cut grass, line and drag ball fields, pick up garbage, all that good stuff. Are you interested? Well, it worked out. I was going to school 2 days a week at Kennesaw State, and I was open 3 of the days. So I took the job part-time, working 3 days a week, doing all those particular things. And then probably wasn't a semester or 2 in, and then I decided to change my major to recreation management at that time. So.
Well, it sounds like you're taking classes at Kennesaw. Were you doing much other than just going to campus to take classes and then going home to work, or what was it like?
Yeah, at that time, as you well know, probably in the early 2000s, Kennesaw State was a commuter campus. You know, there wasn't any housing on site. There weren't a lot of activities. So really, my experience at KSU was very educational. And then I would either go to work or I would spend time with, in the early part, with my girlfriend, my future wife, Shannon, and just being with my family. But I also started to coach youth sports at the age of 18, and that was inspired by my father. And one of my first volunteer activities was to coach football in the Acworth Football Association as an 18-year-old. I remember them having to change the bylaws because my second year they wanted me to be a head coach, but at that time they wouldn't let anybody be a head coach under the age of 21. So they made some modifications. Some of those people I talked about earlier, Jim Horgan, Stanley Howbrooks, Gary Hudson was there, my parents, and they modified that for me to be a head coach, which ended up leading into my first full-time position around 2002. The city did not have much of a relationship with the organizations. Organizations did not have much of a relationship with the city. So the city had the vision at that time to bridge that gap. So they offered me a position as an athletic facilities coordinator. And one of my jobs was to be the liaison between the baseball association and the football association and bridge that gap. So because I was already active in the football association and I already had connections, I felt like, or the council felt like, that I was a natural fit for that position, which was really a great opportunity to start my career. So that was my first full-time experience in 2002.
You talked about a reorganization right at the end of the last century, I guess, the 98, 99, and in that period. Was it that the city just wasn't interested in recreation? And all of a sudden somebody came in that was, or how did that all play out? It sounds like the volunteers were pretty much running things up until that time.
Yeah, it was. There have been different iterations of a recreation department here. And Butch Price tells me about that. Tim Houston on our city council, they tell me those stories. I don't know the particular reason up until 98 that there wasn't a department. Most of the maintenance of the facilities were conducted out of the public works department. So I don't necessarily know the decisions that led to it. But I know with the arrival in 98, 99, 2000 of our current city manager and a lot of the elected officials that have come on board, they obviously felt like that was a priority in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you go to work full time in 2002. What did you take, night classes at that point, or how did you work your education into your full time job?
So I actually worked it out. This was the beautiful thing about college, and I tell my kids today is all my classes, I was pretty much at Kennesaw State 8 to 5 Monday and Wednesday. So on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, and sometimes the weekends, I would be at work. So I was able to stack most of my classes. But then I was also fortunate to have an employer that was flexible with me, because it was easy during the general education first part of college to actually make that arrangement work. But as you're starting to get closer to the end of your degree and the classes are fewer, I was just fortunate to have the flexibility to have an employer that worked with me on that scheduling.
Well, I guess the thing about recreation, it's not a Monday through Friday job anyway, because a lot of the activities are on the weekend.
The evenings and the weekends. And we started one of the things we built our department on was large, impactful special events. And so that caused, that resulted in a lot of weekends, holidays, things like that.
Now, you had something to do with the Roberts School when you first started with the city too, didn't you? Coordinating events through the old Roberts School.
All right, so when I said earlier that my first full-time position was athletic and facilities coordinator, that was the time that the city had used community development block grant funds to renovate Roberts School. And that was that was the other part of my job, was to plan programs and figure out activities that could occupy the Roberts School.
Hang on a second. Just want to make sure okay. Okay, great. Well, why don't you talk a little bit about your family? When did you get married? Was that during this period?
Yeah, it was. So I married my best friend from high school. We actually met when we were 4. My mom used to babysit her and her sister, and her sister was actually is my age. Shannon's a year younger than us. So I was always in the same grade as her sister, and Shannon was a grade below me in high school. So we actually, I had dated her best friend during high school, and through that relationship, I got to know Shannon, and we developed a friendship that turned into her being my best friend. And then we went to my senior prom together, and ended up getting married in 2003.
Okay. So you were still
at the age of 21 and 20. I was 21, she was 20. So we got married young.
All right. And you stayed married?
We have. So we have it's awesome to be able to have to marry your best friend. So she's been incredible, and looking to tolerate the years of coaching youth sports for 20 years, being supportive and being that rock behind the scenes that allowed me to be at the ballpark 3 nights a week, to sit in the stands and not always hear nice things said about her husband, to work a job that is demanding in terms of evenings and weekends and holidays, and to have that support mechanism in the career that I've chosen has been huge. I couldn't have done it without that type of support mechanism at home.
Did she go to Kennesaw?
She went to Acworth Elementary And then her family moved back and forth. Her family, her mom still lives in an older part of our subdivision that we live in today. So pretty much every day I come to work or we drive in and out of the neighborhood, we pass the house that she grew up in. So, but she went to Autry in North Cobb, and she went to Kennesaw State, where she got her bachelor's in education, and she got her master's as well there. And she taught before we had children at Acworth Elementary, and then she took some time off while our kids were in their younger ages, and then now she teaches at Kennesaw Elementary in the same building that I went to school at. So,
how about that? I think I said earlier your kids were 10 and 7, but they're actually 12 and 10.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you talk about them a little bit?
Yeah, so I have a daughter, Ashton. She is 12, and she will be 13 in August. And then I have a son, Grant. He's 10. They're both August babies. So he'll be 11 in August. Both of them, they went through Fry Elementary in the community. We live in the city limits of Acworth. Will be attending. It's hard to believe as we talk about this that I have 2 middle schoolers now, but they will be attending Durham Middle School, and they will eventually go to Alatoona High School. So Ashton, from a recreation standpoint, plays soccer. Grant and mom coaches her. Shannon was an athlete at North Cobb High School as well. She played soccer and basketball there. So she handles the soccer coaching. I did not play that, so I don't have a real good understanding of that. So I'm not proficient in coaching that. But I coach my son in baseball, football, and wrestling. It's really important for me for them to be exposed to different sports, and they both have played different sports throughout their lifetime. I want them to be able to make their own choices on what they end up settling on. Try not to overdo it too much and try to move from season to season. I'm a big believer in there's been a huge movement over the years for sports specialization, but I know the value that I had growing up of playing different sports, where some of them I was better than others, and I got to deal with different people in different sports. I learned a lot of different skills. So I'm a big believer in that. So I like exposing them to different things, but they are both incredible kids, and love having them around.
Well, now, do you live in the city limits? I was wondering about going to Durham, Fry Elementary and Durham Middle School.
Yeah, actually, I do live in the city limits. So I live over near Cobblestone Golf Course off Acworth due west, Nance Road area.
Right. And
we do have residents that go to that feeder pattern. So we have some that do the Acworth, Barber, North Cobb, but we're in that zoning where we go through that feeder pattern.
Well, when you were younger than Grant is now, I did an interview with Harvey and Bessie Durham out on their old homestead, which is exactly where Fry Elementary and Durham Middle School are nowadays.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work over the years. I was able to work with Jimmy Durham on a lot of things, still to this day, from that family.
Yeah, they were a great family, for sure. Yeah. Okay, well, so you got your bachelor's from Kennesaw in 2004. What was your master's in?
My master's was in public administration.
Okay. All right. And when did you become the director of the Parks and Recreation?
I believe it was June of 2005. So it was at the age of 23. So again, very fortunate to work for a council and a city manager that, you know, when you're 23, you have a pretty good feel that you think you know everything and you deserve a lot more than you probably deserve at that point. But they had a lot of faith and they put a lot of faith and trust in me. Looking back, yeah, as a department head, I don't know, hopefully that's paid off for them. But you know, that council at that time had a a lot of faith in me. I'm forever grateful for them and the city manager to even consider me for a position, because I'm just blessed to be able to, ride the wave of a small department that was able to grow. At that time, when I first joined the department, we had 6 full-time employees and 3 part-time. And I think now today we have 32 full-time employees. We've got about 8 part-time that are with us year-round. And then we have probably 50 or 60 different seasonal employees, from camp counselors to scorekeepers to gate attendants at the parks. So we've seen tremendous growth over the 20 years. And in fact, last Friday was my 20th anniversary with the city. It's crazy how time flies.
Wow. So Tommy Allgood would have been mayor by that time. Brian would have been the city manager, right?
Correct. Mayor started, he was on the council when I first got here, and then he became mayor, I believe, in 2002.
Yeah, I think that's right. So they would have been the ones responsible for putting you in as the director, I guess, then, or central role in it all, along with the Board of Aldermen.
Yeah, they had a lot of influence over that. I remember at that time it was Butch, it was Doug Allen, Bob Weatherford, Tim Richardson, and maybe even some Tim Houston.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you had to be one of the youngest directors of Parks and Recreations anywhere in the state of Georgia, I would think, back at that time.
Yeah, definitely. It was not usual to have somebody as young as I was at that time to be over a department.
Yeah, I know you're a modest person, but why do you think they chose you at that point? There had to be some people that were your seniors that were in the department.
There were and there weren't, because we weren't that big at that time. So maybe their options were just limited. No, I think a lot of it had to do with the positioning. I think a lot of it had to do with my involvement in the community. I think there's a level of commitment that comes from working for and serving a community that you grew up in. There's just a different level of buy-in that you have, and man, I just loved it. I loved every aspect of what it was, and maybe that just shined through. But I think there was a lot of mutual trust there. I admired our council, our city manager, and kind of the opportunities that they had given me in this process. So, but I think they trusted me. I worked really, really hard, and that was one thing that my parents always instilled in me. Is to do your best, work hard, and felt like I had tried to do that.
Yeah. Well, at least you had a master's. No, you didn't even have the master's at that time, did you, in 2005?
I didn't even have a bachelor's. Oh, yeah, I did. I just got my bachelor's.
Right. Why did you get a master's in public administration? I guess it would fit in with being the department head to go to public administration. But how did that program work out for you at Kennesaw? Was that helpful with your career?
Yeah, it was. Some of it was just driven out of being the first person in my family to get a college degree. That drive that I think that instilled in me made me want to just continue forward. I think the more I learned about the profession, I learned about maybe the level of professionalism that should be in a department head, inspired me to want to get that to further my education. But I'll never forget that call of getting that letter of being accepted for my master's program. And then even like that at the beginning, but then sitting there on graduation day, just that feeling of accomplishment was huge. I'll never forget that.
Sure. What was your vision for the department when you took over in 2005?
I think for me, it was to be innovative and different. And that's something that we talked to our team a lot about. The good part about kind of driving to that vision is I didn't have a lot of experience, right? I hadn't worked in another department, so I didn't know how things were going, always the way things have always been done. On the negative side of things, I never worked anywhere else. So I didn't have the experience, but it kind of gave us a blank slate. And I think when I saw what other agencies were doing, one thing that drove me was, as much as I appreciated the stories that I told you about watching Jim Horgan and Gary Hudson and Stanley Howbrooks and my parents run these organizations, was things had changed a lot since I was a kid, and demands on time were different, where people used to be able to spend 20, 30, 40 years in an organization and volunteer and support. That wasn't always the case. So, I remember as I started coaching, and I distinctly remember our president at that time, Gary Hudson, coming out when I got to the ballpark at 5:30, coming out of the bathrooms with cleaning supplies in one hand and a trash bag in the other. That was one of our first efforts that changed everything. Was we really believed that volunteer organizations needed to do what they do best, and that's run the league. We as the city had a responsibility to cut the grass and clean bathrooms and do trash. And at that time, we had a defunct baseball organization. We had some really good leadership step in. A lady named Dana Long stepped in about that time, and she just did incredible things with that organization. But it really taught me early in my career is the importance of relationships and how much we needed those relationships. They needed them to run a good program, but then we needed to maintain those facilities so that they could do what they do best, and then we do what we do best. And it created a really incredible partnership. And we had programs expanding. Football was always a big program, but you're talking 100, 150 kids to grow into 450 kids. Our baseball program being 350 kids, expanding up to our high points of like 800, 850 kids. So that vision started to drive it. And again, I think probably not having a background in traditional parks and recreation allowed us to quickly modify with the times. And I talked about events earlier, and the value of bringing those large events to the community, creating positive exposure. Our downtown started to pick up the pace in the late 90s, and we started to have, Henry's Louisiana Grill started to arrive, and we had other restaurants locating and boutiques and shops opening. So we took a position, and this is something that drove us, was Parks and Recreation is an economic development tool in a community. And that's not the way that most people looked at it. Most people, when I told them what I did, they expected me to have a whistle around my neck, a hat, and some khaki shorts out there running a sports program, where we wanted to be looked at differently. We knew when we recruited a national wakeboarding event that it was going to bring 400 riders from all over the world that were going to have to stay multiple nights in our hotel room. We didn't settle for where they did everywhere else, where they did their awards down at the park and then everybody disappeared, got on their planes and went home. We scheduled a block party downtown, and we did the awards downtown. We wanted them to stay one more night. We knew the economic impact of that. We wanted live music out there. So that was a driver early on, is we wanted to be innovative. We wanted to be different. We wanted to position ourselves to be a vital resource to the community.
I want to talk a little bit more about the economic development, the kinds of vision that you're talking about. But maybe a way to ask it is, Parks and Recreation sounds very traditional for a title for a department. When does the community resource get added to the title? Was that always in there?
No, it wasn't. That was added probably 7 or 8 years ago, and city manager Brian Boltice and I joke a lot about this. I think it was a way, we kid around, it was a way to just define kind of like in a job description where it says all other duties is assigned. It was a way to kind of wrap some things underneath us. But I think where that came in was we are relationship driven as a department, and we have a lot of different hands that reach out into the community. We have after school programs. We serve a lot of our local schools. We have relationships with schools. One thing that we've been intentional about is we have different members of our department that are assigned to local civic clubs and organizations, being active in the business association. So all those things really come back to relationships. And, I was taught that relationships are like bank accounts. You have to make a lot of small deposits over time, because at some point, especially in the world of government, you're going to have to make a withdrawal from those relationships. But I think the community resource part, and something else that drives us in our core values is we may not be able to get you the answer or the solution that you need, but because of our connections in the community, if somebody calls us, we may not be able to say yes to that, but we may be able to either get them in the direction of yes, or we may be able to get them to the people that can help them. So I think that's where the community resource aspect comes from.
It's pretty unusual, I think, to be involved with Downtown Development Authority. When did that relationship come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, that is another thing that led into the tagging on the community resource department. So I believe it was 07, 08 when the economy started to decline. The city previously used to house under one person's position, and this is the way that most communities do this. A downtown development director, a tourism director, and a historic preservation director was all one person. And we had those positions throughout my time here, but things were tight. We were looking at creative solutions, and at that time, our current director had left. And one thing that we have really tried to do is really recruit a lot of people. You hear a lot of times you should always hire people smarter than you. Well, that was something I tried to listen to at a young age, and we hired some incredible people, extremely talented people in our department. But because of the trust that the council and the city manager had in us, when that position came up, they split historic preservation underneath community development, and they moved Downtown Development Authority and the Tourism Authority under our department. And there's several reasons for that. So even prior to that, we provided operational support to the Acworth Lake Authority, the Tree Commission. So we had a reputation for being able to work with these boards and commissions who we feel like are ambassadors for us in the community. The better we can keep these people informed of what's going on, not just in their world as a volunteer, they can better inform the public of what's going on out in the community. So the downtown and development and the tourism authority played in because we were the ones that were ultimately planning the large events from a tourism standpoint that were putting heads in beds, that were generating positive economic impact. We had started kind of leading the effort of social media at that time. So social media is a big player in tourism efforts. From the downtown development perspective, again, the events that we drove people in, creating exposure for, we managed a lot of those. We worked hand in hand with the developer or the downtown development director, the tourism director at that time. So we were experienced with that. We maintained the beautification efforts, the landscaping, the flowers, the plantings, all those things. So it was just a natural fit. And because times were starting to get tough, it was a really creative and unique way to take advantage of resources. Now, looking back, what it did is in a lot of communities, those people that serve in those positions are on an island by themselves a lot of times. And what it did was we utilized two of our assistant directors. So Kim Watt was an assistant director and Jeff Chase. And because of their skill set and their talents, they were able to step right into those roles, but they were on an island. They had access to my help. They had access to the rest of our team's help. So fast forward, kind of a funny story. When we first took over the support of the Downtown Development Authority, we used to get grades from the Department of Community Affairs. And our first submission, we got like a D. And I think a lot of it had to do is a lot of people in that world, when you talk about traditional, had a lot of difficulty wrapping their mind around, like, why is a Parks and Recreation Department providing support to these people? They may not have necessarily liked the fact that, we had people that were assistant directors of recreation or assistant directors of operation who were also the tourism director, and they were also the downtown development director. So I think we may have we kind of went on a non-traditional model, and we weren't looked at favorably initially. But the funny thing is, you fast forward 12, 13 years later, that same organization just designated us as a Georgia Exceptional Main Street. We're one of 18 communities in the state of Georgia. So call it luck, call it planning, whatever you want to. But that model is something that I think people look at now. They probably thought we were a little crazy in the beginning when the council decided this and the city manager kind of tasked us with this. But in the end, it's been a really positive relationship. It's created a lot of opportunities for our team and growth.
Talk about the Lake Authority. I think when you started with the city, was about the time that the lake was closed down for a while. Did you play a role in getting it cleaned up and the Acworth Lake Authority back in business again?
I did not. It had been opened a year or two before I started with the department. And ironically enough, one of the studies that closed the lake was done by one of my professors at Kennesaw State at the time. Actually, no, it was more our current city manager, Brian Boltice, when he arrived. There was a lot of dispute over time of what contributed to the pollution of the lake. And like to date, we test for fecal coliform levels within the lake. And there were two questions out there, whether it was the geese that were causing this. But then we found out, I think in the end, it ended up being malfunctioning sewer lines that were contributing to it. But Brian tells the story of sitting in a meeting one day and just asking a simple question: when was the last time anybody tested the lake? And at that time, repairs had been made and improvements had been made to the infrastructure around it. And he just asked a simple question of, has anybody tested it lately? So they started testing the lake, and the lake was fine. So the lake opened back up. Right before I got here, one of the first events I participated in was the Love the Lake series. And that was a partnership between the business association and the city that kind of started to bring people back to the lake. We don't deal with this as much now today, but early in my career, there was an extremely negative perception of Lake Acworth, where now it's one of the most popular places to be. It's one of our highest visited parks.
Talk about the relationship with the Corps of Engineers. How much of your park land is really Corps of Engineer land that you lease from them?
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people don't know. Probably about 85% of our parks in the city are actually federal land that we lease. And now that's where the Lake Authority comes into play a little bit with some of the properties. And there's some history behind this. So the original property on the north side of the lake, and the south side of the lake were all leased originally to the Acworth Lake Authority. So when we talk about the north side of the lake, that's Cobble Park, it's Overlook Park. Then you've got the lake, and then on the south side, you have South Shore Park kind of over to the west, and then the Cobblestone Golf Course to the east, because Cobblestone Golf Course actually is on federal property as well. So back in, I think, 1984, and I could have my dates out of whack a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that's it, the Lake Authority actually relinquished their portion of the lease on the lake and the south side, so that's South Shore Park and its Cobblestone Golf Course, to Cobb County. We have actually worked over the last 7 to 8 years where the county has now relinquished the lease on Lake Acworth back to us and South Shore Park. So the county does have some general green space of Corps of Engineer property, but Cobblestone Golf Course is most of their frontage on Lake Acworth, and the rest of it has been leased back to the Acworth Lake Authority, who then leases out the property to the city of Acworth for operations and management of the facility.
Talk about Horizon Field. I think that's a pretty neat story. How did that come about?
It's the beautiful thing about the community that we live in is it all started with a conversation. A good friend of the city's and mine, Marlon Longacre, had a child with special needs. So it was probably around 2007, we started to have the conversation about, and we asked the question, why don't we have programs for individuals with special needs? And we just started talking, and we were looking at space, and we went as far as to have a plan of this dedicated area all by itself. And there were communities that had come before us. Peachtree City, Alpharetta had a field, and basically what it is it's a baseball field with a synthetic rubber surface that accommodates wheelchairs and walkers, and they had kind of gone before us. So we started listening to those other communities, and they were like, all right, let's just give it a shot and see if there's a need here. And there was an article in the Merida Daily Journal at that time, and it had talked about that there were like 15,000 children in Cobb County school systems with special needs. And as we have done over the last 20 years, we recognized a gap. And what we tried to do with that was fill a gap. So literally within a couple weeks, we partnered with a radio station, Kicks 101.5 at the time, to get some marketing out there. We went to just a couple of our local schools and the special education teachers, and we said, hey, in one day, we just want to do something. We want to have on our regular baseball fields, we want to invite our special needs athletes out to the fields and participate in a one-day game exhibition. And I'll never forget this day. It was on our regular fields. We have 4 fields that are all kind of knitted together in a hub there. And literally in 2 to 3 weeks of promoting this to the school, we had like 62 kids sign up. Then the even amazing part is we went to Coach Queen at North Cobb High School and some of the other surrounding schools and the football teams, and we said, hey, we need buddies for this day. And all the high schools showed up. We had church volunteers out there. And that day, the light bulb, the switch went on. We're like, we got to do this. We got to figure out what this looks like long term. So we ran another league the following summer on the regular fields. And then we started a fundraising effort. It was a public-private partnership. And we were kind of at the beginning phases. We probably had, $13,000 to $15,000 in the bank. We had the dreams, we had the ambitions, and we had sent out some invites. And our city manager had sent out an invite to his distribution list. We all sent it out. Well, through his distribution list, we came across an anonymous foundation that said, look, if you'll raise $250,000, we'll match it. So immediately between the Lake Authority, the city, Cobb County, the state legislature put in money. The city of Kennesaw even put in money. We matched that $250,000, and our fundraising goal was about $1.2 million. So we were able to work with a local contractor who waived their profit, which brought that $1.2 million number down. We worked with Bill Hammock and C.W. Matthews. He was the president at that time. They came in and donated, because essentially the field is a parking lot with a rubber layer over it. So they're the experts in that. We had to get everything right. So we reached out to them. They donated the materials and the labor to get all that done. So we immediately were in business. Like, we went from having a little bit in the bank to having $500,000. We did individual campaigns. We had people come out of the woodworks. It showed up before Christmas time, a gentleman that wanted to do something in honor of his family, and he ended up contributing in his family close to $40,000. Day Chevrolet was a tremendous partner in our community and helped us raise money. It just steamrolled, the snowball effect. And before you know it, in 2009, I believe in April, we opened the facility, and it has been one of the best things that we have ever done in this community. The way it brings our local schools and nonprofits and our volunteers in the community together And it's sports in its purest form. We started with a baseball league. Now we have a kickball league. We have all kinds of activities. We have people participating all the way from the age of 5 to like 68 in the program now. So it's expanded past kids. It's gotten to adults. And part of that was, again, recognizing the need, where we brought on our special populations coordinator, Lauren Ham. We knew how to run leagues. We could do that stuff, but there was a level of skill and knowledge that we didn't have, and we recognized that. So we brought somebody in that did have those skill sets, and she's just taken those programs and has just run with it and has developed those way past what we could ever imagine.
Wow, that's a great story. Tell me how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected Parks and Recreation the last several months.
It has presented its challenges. There's no file folder for COVID-19, right? Like, we can go back and check some history of things, and we've experienced a lot over the 20 years that we've been a department, but there's not a lot of, there isn't that file folder that lays out the strategy for how to deal with this. So it's been one of the more interesting experiences in my career, because all of a sudden you go from making a tremendous impact on a regular basis with all the things that our team does to we're shutting down this, we're closing this, we're closing parks, we're not doing programs. And that's tough, but one thing that our team, and we've always tried to build a very versatile team, it was really neat to see our people step up. So maybe you weren't running programs, but maybe you were helping collect fees at a gate at a park. Maybe normally you worked at the community center, but since it was closed, you were out in the field helping the teammates get grass cut. You may normally answer a phone, but you then were cleaning contact surfaces. It was really neat to see the way our team pulled together, and it's really neat to see the innovation of them pulling out of this too. It's not going to look like in 6 months or a year or 5 years what it looked like before this. So to see us doing virtual classes with senior citizens, because they fall within the 65 and up and the vulnerable population, to see our team doing exercise classes through the computer. Where we're modifying activities where we may not be able to run a flag football program, but we're going to do an adult football combine where they go out and do like the NFL does as they're prepping for draft day. So it's been really neat to see that, but it's really neat to see our operations team support the other departments in the city to make sure that our employees feel safe when they come to work. So it's been a tough experience, but I think it's going to be an experience that just makes us way better moving forward. We're going to be more efficient. We're going to be more creative. And then look, all of us in history have walked through periods of scarcity, right? And this is the younger generation in our department. We're a very relatively young department. Our average age of employee is 33 years old. So we have millennials, we have Generation Z. This is that first experience that they've had with scarcity. And we all know from the Great Depression and different periods of our history that innovation comes out of scarcity. You learn how to do more with less. So as tragic and as tough as some of these times are, we are going to be better for it coming out of this.
Well, I see that you found your way to the barber shop, I think, since the pandemic.
Yes. Yeah.
So some things are beginning to open up a little bit again.
Yeah.
What are the things that you're proudest of your, I guess, 15 years now as director of Parks and Recreation and Community Resources?
So we've talked about a lot of these. So the Horizon Field was one of those. For me, the Expanding Horizons program and the Acworth Achievers program, that is another story of an anonymous benefactor with wanting no credit, stepping in and filling a gap in our community. So we had a gentleman approach us, and he showed up one day in the early 2000s, and he met with the mayor and we connected. And he basically told a story of in the 80s, his business that he has in Acworth, he doesn't live in the community, but he's had a business here, was struggling. And the city really worked with him on his power rates and getting him through a tough time. And he said, and this is another lesson in life, you never know who you're talking to, right? So the gentleman is one of 4 brothers that was left a multi-million-dollar family foundation with the one goal to change kids' lives. So he says, we want you to design a program to impact kids' lives. And it started with giving us a check for $25,000. And they were insistent on, we don't want any recognition for this, which is just incredible, like humility at its best, right? So we started a program, and a lot of it was based on, and we called it Expanding Horizons, because what we saw in our community was we wanted kids to have the opportunity to see outside the bounds of Acworth. You know, even growing up, my life was circled around Acworth, Kennesaw. I didn't travel a lot, but this was what I was exposed to. But it was to give these kids educational opportunities that they may not otherwise be afforded to do. So we went to the guidance counselors at the school because they know the kids way better than we did at that point. And we just said, look, we want those kids that just need that experience. You know, they need, you know, when they're sitting in that classroom on Monday where maybe I was sharing the story of my dad took me to a Braves game or my family took me to the beach, who are those kids that just need that extra experience? So we designed a field trip program to take kids in the Metro Atlanta, South Tennessee kind of area on field trips. And we did that 5 to 6 times a year. The benefactor paid for everything, the transportation, the admission, breakfast, lunch. And we had 80 kids in that program right off the bat. So fast forward a year later, sitting in the office of this benefactor, and he looks at me and he says, well, I got to go to Washington, D.C. when I was in 8th grade, which I did too, and I had that experience. And he goes, these kids deserve that opportunity. And I was like, well, $25,000 is a lot of money, but we can't get to Washington, D.C. and conduct the regular program. So he says, well, we'll do more. So they ended up giving us an additional $25,000 to take a group of 24 kids, which I was fortunate to be part of that first trip to Washington, D.C. for a week, all expense paid. And you fast forward to today, that foundation alone has contributed more than $700,000 to this community and these kids for that program, which has spurred another $500,000 of investments from support from the Acworth Housing Authority that funds an after-school program that this evolved into, where we felt like, you know, 6 times a year isn't enough to impact these lives as much as we want to. So they funded an after-school program so that we can work with the kids twice a week throughout school. And again, that led into bringing people on our team that had the skill set and the knowledge to work with those populations. And we've had tremendous people that have served in those positions over the years. You know, Frank Wright was one of those initial coordinators that we had that helped design that program. Michael Lewis and now Jordan Gonzalez have all just done an incredible job impacting children's lives. But it all stemmed from, you know, some act of kindness back in the 80s that this gentleman remembered. And I guarantee you when they were talking to him then, they didn't think that this guy had access to those type of funds or that type of impact, but they've trusted us, and it's spurred other resources that we could have never imagined, and the opportunities. And I'm talking, these kids have been to Washington, D.C., New York City, Cape Canaveral to watch a shuttle launch, Kansas City to participate in the All-America City competition. You know, they've been all over and experienced way more than probably I ever have in terms of exposure. So that is a huge accomplishment, I think, that our team and our city, the mayor, the council, the city manager, our staff have achieved there. So those are really big. And that and the Horizon Field were the really big reasons, the major reasons that we were designated in 2010 as a All-America City.
Well, that's fabulous. And, Acworth is not the biggest city in the world, but it's remarkable how much you've done. I'm not sure there's any large recreation departments that have done as much as you all have.
Yeah, we've been fortunate that, again, our council and our leadership have placed an emphasis on Parks and Recreation. And it's a huge element. Mayor Alligood talks a lot about quality of life, and it is a huge component of quality of life. And we have the ability to impact a lot of people. So we're just grateful to be in a position that we're able to do that.
Well, you wrote, we go to church here, I coach here, we recreate here, we dine here. So you're still finding everything you want in Acworth, it sounds like.
We are. Our family attends North Star Church in the community, and they've been a shining example in our community. There's so many different parts of our community, but their willingness to serve the community was an inspiration to us, and they're huge. You talk about a lot of times it takes a village to raise a child, and I am simply a product of so many people in this community that have poured into my life, from those volunteers that we talked about to our council, the city manager, our leadership, the people below me in the organization that have led up and poured into me. But there have been a lot of people in my life where about 10 years ago, I had some men step into my life. And those people are Mike Lynch, the pastor at North Star, and a good friend of mine, Andy Duncan, who owns the local Chick-fil-A's, and Todd Lawless at Freedom Church, and Barry Nash, who grew up in the community and owns a state farm here in the community, where we sit down once a week and we study leadership. And we learn how to get better as people. And those are the people that have inspired me. And we go back to, like we talked about earlier in the process, I didn't know any different, right? I didn't know what a traditional government was supposed to operate, like a traditional Parks and Recreation department, but there's a lot to be learned from a Chick-fil-A, right? Or a church that has grown in a community from scratch, So those outside perspectives have been a huge influence. And then just being exposed to leaders like we have on our council, and especially our mayor, is the most dynamic public servant. And I don't say that just because he's my boss, but that's a reputation that he has all around this community. He's not just a leader in Acworth. He's a leader in Cobb County and the region. And just those genuine, we have an elected officials. And again, I'm not saying this because I work for them. They are just quality people in a world where you don't always see that in an elected official standpoint. And they're just really good, practical human beings that have just hired the right people and allowed us to go and move this community forward.
Well, thank you. This has been a fascinating interview for me. Maybe that's a good way to end it, unless you had anything else you wanted to say.
No.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And let's add one more thing about the community center. How did that come about?
Yeah, so the community center has been a dream of ours for a long time. And in fact, it all started out of a failure. So I think it was like 2006, we had the idea of doing a bond referendum for recreation. And we threw a lot of different things into it. And at that time, I think we were allocating, it was like a $13 million referendum. And we were allocating maybe like $2.5 million to build this community center, because it was something we wanted, and as somebody that grew up in the community, it was something we lacked. But it failed miserably at the polls. I think it was like 224 votes for and maybe like 850 plus against. It failed miserably. But we learned a lot of lessons from that, and that actually drove us to realize that there were some disconnects in the community. So that's actually what drove us starting to get involved in our civic organizations, because it allowed us to build relationships and deliver accurate and timely information to the community there. So fast forward, the SPLOST program, which is the Special Local Option Sales Tax, we were developing the referendum for the 11th SPLOST, and there was a lot of discussion around it. We had a really good relationship with the county, And I particular, one of my mentors in the field, Eddie Cannon, was the director at that time. We had a conversation that below Dallas Highway, Roswell Road, which is essentially kind of the dividing point geographically in the county, there were not any public recreation centers above that line. There were two kind of settled on that line, but in a county with that many people, that was certainly a deficiency that we saw there. So we started the conversation. We worked with the county leadership at that time, and we were going to have a partnership there. Because times were tough, there was a lot of discussion of, at that time, SPLOST were usually 6 years. So the design program was 6 years. Then because of the economy and the time, it got moved down to 5, and the community center was kind of hanging on the project list, but then it went down to a 4-year SPLOST. And at that point, neither the city nor the county could justify allocating that much to a community center. But the blessing in disguise was the bond failed. We didn't get it in that SPLOST, but we were planning the 16th SPLOST. We worked with the county. At that time, they were looking more at investing in the actual construction of it rather than the operation. So they invested $8.5 million. The city invested around $3 million when it was all settled in to build this world-class facility. And this exceeded any dream that we ever had in 2004 or 2006 when we put it on the referendum, 2011 when we were trying to get it on the SPLOST referendum. So sometimes you just got to be patient and wait there as well. So it ended up being a true blessing. And, you know, this has opened us up to programming opportunities beyond our imagination. We have a banquet hall now that seats 350 people that we've never had before. We have our own gymnasiums. We have an indoor walking track. We have exercise rooms. We have office spaces. We have an incredible customer experience area that we've never had before. And this is all in line with another big accomplishment during this time. And when I say the team, again, that's the mayor, the council, city manager, the citizens, our boards and commissions. We're the downtown project and the development of the Parkside district and the bridge that got us connecting over the train tracks so that we could see development on the north side of the tracks. The train depot and being part of that and documenting the city's history through that. And again, looking at that innovatively and different, where a lot of museums and communities are static and they're staffed and they can have a cost burden on a lot of communities, where we were like, let's go and do a mix. We worked with Kennesaw State University and created storyboards that people could read on their own. We created an electronic history center that has documented histories of the city, you know, different phases of the city's history. And then this oral history program is incredible. You and I were talking about before we got on, is that one day, you know, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, people way beyond that in our world are going to be able to look back and see, you know, be able to know my story. Like, I wish that I had those opportunities for my family. And, you know, the oral history program we had was great, you know, that, you know, you were part of that. You know, they were in books and they sat on shelves, and now people can visit that depot and press the button and listen to, right now, over 60 people tell their stories of Acworth history, and it's real and it's live. So it's really neat to be a part of that process too, and all the improvements that have been made there, and the development of Logan Farm Park too, that kind of squeezes in between the community center and this redevelopment that we did, and just all of that was just incredible.
Well, thanks, James. I think we probably could have done a 5-hour interview if we wanted to. You've got so much to talk about, and so much that you've been involved in, and so many things happening in Acworth, I think. But this has been fabulous, and I thank you again for this interview.
Well, thank you, and thank you for what you do too in making this oral history program possible, and not just in our community, but all over Cobb County and your efforts there. So that's definitely worth noting.
Well, it's fun for me. I enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to